Hello, I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein. Welcome to Interior Design, The New Freedom. Today we'll be talking to design partners Bob Bray and Mike Schaible. In theory, Bray specializes in creative design, while Schaible is the man who runs the business. Why don't you guys tell us how it works in practice? Who does what?
I think we're still trying to find out exactly how we do that.
Well, what does it take to make a partnership work, let alone work well?
It varies in every instance, really. I usually start the design. Mike comes over and says, I hate it. And then we sit down and work on the design.
But what about the client? Where do they come into the decision-making process?
We get along very well with the clients. But back to that other question, we've had some real problems in 10 years of business. It has been extremely difficult at times. Now, Mike is probably my best friend, family. I call him family at this point. But we've had some rough moments.
Well, I would assume
basically
that any
two
collaboration...
very strong egos. And he really did think that this was his business. And I really did think that this was my business. Now we do think it's our business.
I saw that one. Well, do each of you ever use each other as a buffer zone between the firm and the client, for example?
Oh, sure.
I can imagine Mrs. Jones on the telephone earlier today, and there she is on the telephone for the 4th time because the carpenter has yet to show up, and you know that neither of you are getting on the telephone. I understand your position, but to whom does she turn to for relief under circumstances like that?
She plays both.
How does it work out?
Depends on what's happening and who's been dealing with that certain part. Sometimes I'll refer her to Bob, or he'll refer her back to me. Or if it's something I really don't know, you just say, well, you'll have to speak to Bob, and by the time she speaks to Bob, she's cooled down.
What was life like when you lived in small towns, very small towns? For example, Bob comes from Oklahoma and Mike from Colorado. Why don't we start with you, Mike?
Okay, it's a town in Colorado, Akron, Colorado, 1,800 people, and I couldn't wait to get out.
His mother was the mayor.
The biggest influence on me at the time was my mother, and like we'd go home and move the kitchen from one side to the other, you know, the appliances. Spent a lot of time doing that. And I was real anxious to get out of town.
Was mayor a full-time occupation?
Oh, no, she was also a florist.
Did you work in the flower shop?
Not too much. We fought a lot. So. But then I went to the University of Colorado and studied interior design. And the head of the department had graduated from Parsons, so I came to Parsons.
Was there a particular person or a circumstance that most influenced you?
I idolized my brother. He's 8 years older and had major influence on my work now, leading me to design, actually. He had written a letter to, I love this story, to Albert Camus, and he had gotten a response, and I just thought that was terrific. So I wrote Frank Lloyd Wright.
Did you get a response?
I certainly did. I had
What did you ask
several
him?
letters. I don't remember what I asked in the first letters, but I remember going down to the mailbox and pulling out that parchment envelope, and just in heaven, just God sent, with a big FLLW seal stamped on it. And the first 2 letters were actually Frank Lloyd Wright.
You studied architectural engineering, I believe.
I did.
With a plan to doing what?
I was always interested in interiors, but the schools, they're not very good. In fact, they were not good at all. So I studied architectural engineering and then came to Parsons.
Why don't we talk about a specific assignment for a moment, and one that I assume is one of your larger assignments, and a recent one as well. And that was the restructuring and design of a 2-story maisonette in a very grand and very old Park Avenue building that included in addition to a standard living room and a dining room and a kitchen and bath and bedrooms, library, bar, playroom, maid's room, all sorts of things that you redesigned and redefined the space. Because it appears to me that you set out to design not only rooms, but rooms within rooms. What was your intention?
You just hit it. The rooms within rooms. People all talk about ultimately getting these great spaces and moving into the really large apartments. And we've seen this many times. They get it, they've got it, and they stay in the little back room, the little library, the sitting room off the bedroom. The large spaces are just untouched. Like the old school living rooms were not.
Are they intimidating? Is that why people...
They are intimidating. When you go home alone, or even two people, rooms that are 30 by 70, or they're just not comfortable. So what we did, they would try to create a whole other environment, a shell within a shell. And your description was exactly what the intent was.
Well, what made you decide to retain some of the older elements or choose to introduce other elements into the scheme?
Well, any time that there's really something beautiful there, we'll work with it. If it's ugly or it doesn't work, we'll try to remove it. There were many moldings there that were beautiful. Many of the shapes were beautiful. We couldn't touch the windows, so that was a given. They were a special height, so we had to work with that. The library was very special. The paneling's beautiful, so we kept that.
I think of you fellows as being very genial and responsive to your clients' needs. But actually, somewhere you once said we ask them directly what they like and what they dislike, but we take the dislikes with a grain of salt. Were you kidding then, too, or why do you ask them?
No. Not kidding at all. Someone, it happens so many times, someone will tell you, I absolutely hate purple. But they've seen something they want you to see because they really like this, so you go look at it and say, yes, but this is purple. And then they say, yes, but this has...
A different purple.
So it many times means nothing.
How do you live?
I'm not your normal type of apartment dweller. When I go home, I pace a lot. I'm continually plotting and thinking about what I'm going to do, and with the career, particular project that you're working on, just sketch pads for days, or on the wall if that's near. A bed. It may be messy, but the entire apartment gets messy, but I'm a fanatic about cleanliness. There may be a pile of things here, but you can also do this and it's fine.
Did you always live that way, or did you decide to pare down that environment to its most minimal?
I've lived in every scale of apartment, and I moved to this one. I had one apartment that was what? That was about 4,000 square feet. And I lived in a 12-foot square area of that and thought, this is ridiculous for me to maintain all of this. Most of my interest was outside that apartment. And
does that give you
still
insight
is.
into the way other people probably live too? And is that why you keep on having space overlap? You're nodding your head because obviously you live in a different way.
Yeah, he lives in a very special way.
Do you live in such a spare way as well?
Spare, but not, you know, I have a bigger apartment, and I have things, not a lot, and it's very organized. I can't stand piles all over.
We don't visit each other often.
I haven't been in his apartment in 2 or 3 years.
You're known for minimalism, but how much minimally these days does a Bray Schaible job cost? And what's the lowest price job that you'll take on?
We've talked about the lowest job that we can work on right now, $50,000.
And
the
how do you
total
arrive
budget,
at
but
that
basically
figure?
that's.
But we don't take
But we
those
haven't
either.
taken those in a while. Fortunately, our business has grown, and we've been able to do this. We're now working on a job that's $1 million, $500,000.
What does a client get for $1 million?
Everything.
They deserve everything, and they must have everything.
No, but
They
you.
get a couple of designers that are under their feet from the crack
But
of
the thing
dawn
is, you have to
until-
realize that
Well,
someone
where
who.
does the money go? Let's say we're talking about a specific job. Where does the money go in $1 million job?
We get totally involved in the architecture, remember. If you have a triplex that has 100 windows, and the client wants new windows and good windows and pivot windows and soundproof windows, that's $150,000 right there. The same thing with the through-the-wall air conditioning and heating units. So we've done nothing really to make our 8x10 glossies look good, but you've spent a lot of money just in the mechanics of an apartment. A kitchen these days is, a good kitchen is about 50 to 75,000, and it's easy for it to be 150,000.
But I don't understand why a kitchen costs $50,000. It seems to me that a refrigerator, when last I looked, cost several $1,000s, and the best stove must cost the same thing, and I guess some air vents and some cabinets. How does that all add up to cost so much?
I do this myself every time.
Okay, but you also have to go back to the architecture. Many times in old buildings, you open them up, the plumbing's gone, the electric's gone. So you have to do all new electric, all new plumbing.
So a lot of the
Just-
costs are really hidden costs, and as yet, we really haven't talked about the role of an interior designer. Incidentally, do you call yourselves interior designers? Are you decorators? Are you space planners?
All the above.
We
And
call
not,
us-
not fussy about the title.
But I would say we
Some people
basically
are.
refer to ourselves as interior designers, but we do all of the above.
What's the difference between an interior designer and a decorator?
Well, I think if we just talk about what we do, that's easiest. It's like if we go in and we start working on the architecture, tearing it apart, working with the electrical and the plumbing, really working with the structure. Or we could go in and we could do a decorating job where we go in and apply things and move in furniture, but not really get involved in the structure.
It's
Or the-
basically a process that never is defined very well. But for me, it's easy. They overlap. Decorators do design work, designers do the work of a decorator. If you need a dining chair in your dining room, you can go out and do wonderful selective buying and purchase something. And you're basically, that's decoration to me. Or if you can't find what you need, you design a chair. And that's simply designing.
In that Park Avenue apartment, you not only designed the space, you also decorated it. But you modified what is the color scheme that we usually identify with you, gray and black and white. And you modified it to include some softer tones, and it is actually a very luscious vanilla and pink and taupe. And in fact, a very mellow version of what your usual palette is. Why did you choose to do that? Is that a change in the direction of your design and your approach?
I think it's many things. One of the things in the beginning with the budget is you try to spend the money the best way possible. And if it's a low budget and you think of maintenance, you think of all these things. When you have a larger budget, you can start going into some other materials. But some of the low budget jobs that we did in the beginning, you pick the best materials you know.
I don't think anyone really knows how the whole high-tech and the minimalism things really came about for many of the best designers. For us, we were very traditionally trained. I love antiques. We know a lot about antiques and about period design. We went to Parsons in the days where you would sit on a little folding stool all day long, once a week in the Metropolitan.
Very bizarre.
And trace the shell motif of
Really?
a very good Queen Anne chair. And you learn to love those things, to the point that when we started working, our jobs, we were making things out of nothing. Someone who would come to you with, $9,000 to do a two-bedroom apartment. Yet we had been trained to
Not so
love,
funny to me.
love quality. So of course you could not touch a reproduction. We just simply wouldn't. And the high-tech components, it was a whole body of work that was untapped, yet they were real. Each item was real.
Do you
They
still
were
use,
good.
now that you're in the
They were
high-budget
excellent.
area?
Absolutely.
Do you still use high, for example, what are some of your favorite Bray Scheibleisms of high-tech?
That's not the way it comes about.
Then tell us how it does.
It's when you're working on this plan and you see here's a problem, and yes, that would solve this problem very well.
So it's a
That's
specific
simple.
solution to a specific problem, but there must be some devices or whatever, or design effects that you particularly like, either in hardware or in furnishings that you use, for example, the gray carpeting.
Well, one of the things that came about that we used a lot of in a flower shop that we did, it was one of our first jobs.
Wasn't that your very first job, the
Yes.
flower shop at the General Motors building?
For terrestris. And the ceiling was all hung in steel grating. And we've used steel grating over the years for
Subway kind of grating.
For convector covers and all. And I guess we did become known for using this.
I know that you work closely with clients throughout the planning and execution of a project. Do you ever require or insist or urge that they get rid of the furnishings that they've had before you start the job?
Yes.
How do you
And
do that?
no. Well, sometimes you just say, you know, if we're going to do this job,
Can't deal with
we
this.
can't deal with this furniture. I mean, it has nothing to do with what we're about. I mean, it's not hard and cold. It's you work into it, and but it is true. There's no way if they have an ugly
What's an
group
ugly?
of furniture or something that just has nothing to do with what our spaces
Well, how
are
did they
about.
come to you in the first place?
Well, they've either been to a space or they've seen our publicity. And even at that point, we asked them to come to our office for the first meeting, and we show them our portfolio, and we talk about what we do. We basically do not talk about their job at all. We just talk about what we've done and what we're about and how we work. If they're interested, the next step would be to go to their apartment and to see it and see what they're about, specifically.
And then if you're interested, how do you
This
decide?
is very important, and a lot of people don't realize that. They think, oh, if we're interested in you, but it's a two-way, because it's a long, long road.
How long does the average job take nowadays?
About a year.
How close to the original amount that you've budgeted does the job end up being?
Oh, it usually comes in way under. No.
We know better. But how close to the budget
We
do you
used
hold?
to say that we used to do preliminary budgets, and we used to say this will come in basically around 10%. We
Much
try to get
harder
an
to look
indication of the budget from a client, some idea. We hope that they have some idea. And then we put that in the back of our mind and we proceed to do exactly what we're going to do, with the understanding with the client that yes, the budget may be over, but they're in full control, and we know ways we can cut it. That doesn't happen often, because they usually want what they see. The ideal client is one that you really become involved with in the project. There's a great deal of input from the client.
How does that
and
work?
How do you mean?
How does the client get the opportunity? I mean, you have very firm points of view, and however gentle the touch is, I don't know how easy it would be for a client to try to be as persuasive as he or she would like to be with the two of you. How do they get an opportunity to be part of the design
we usually say you've got
process?
2 minutes. No, it happens. We start talking. They may say something about, I don't think that works. I'm not sure about that. And my immediate reaction is, well, then go to hell. But I have to keep cool, and Bob's thinking, and then I start thinking, and you think, they're right. And what happens many times, it ends up better because of this input.
Most of the complaints that you get are valid.
Right.
The client's solution is usually terrible. But
They know there's something wrong with it, and it's up to
you.
you to resolve it in a more aesthetically pleasing way. You very often do not place furniture against walls. You do place paintings, however, leaning against walls. Why do you prefer that to hanging them?
It's not really a preference. It's just one of the alternatives that I do like. And that usually happens because someone said, oh, you know, I like what you did there, can I do that here? And you just simply say yes.
But what happens when the client neither has a terrific collection of paintings or lives in a room that has floors like a castle, and like many people, particularly in urban centers, live by choice or necessity in box-like buildings that are, in the end, uninteresting, in the beginning, uninteresting spaces? What do you do then?
We have many examples of that right here in the city, in the new apartment buildings. You know, they have low ceilings, they have ugly windows, very boxy rooms, small rooms.
How do you resolve the uninteresting space then?
It's really working with the architecture. You know, moving walls or changing the shape or trying to play up the window or the view.
Working in these buildings is really a struggle if you want to give it any kind of uniqueness. But oddly enough, if you really labor over that plan and keep looking at it, you can find some relationship between that window and one column, and you get a glimpse of an idea. And it's amazing what can come out of those simple things.
What's the job that you've done that is most satisfying to both of you?
I think one of the jobs is the job you were talking about, the Park Avenue apartment. That's one example.
Was it because of the scale, let alone the, end result? But
well, it was the scale, it was the client. You know, it's doing something that you really like and it works. I mean, it's built the way you want it, and you're pleased with how it's built. You end up, the clients are pleased, you end up friends with the client. You know,
you've done that with many of your clients, haven't you?
We have been so fortunate in that respect. It's unbelievable. We have great clients. And particularly when I get together with other designers and sit around for an evening and listen to the conversations, I feel that we're practically in another business. Don't take that for granted. Have wonderful clients.
So another unusual compliment paid to you is one of your current clients, by any standard, one of the preeminent artists of our day. What are you doing for Jasper Johns?
3 perfect shacks if it kills us all, and it may.
Why? What do you mean 3 perfect shacks?
well, before you say that, first of all, we're doing a house for Jasper in St. Martin. A house, guest house, and pool. Now you can talk about the perfect shacks.
Well, he originally went to Philip Johnson. Philip had done a sketch on a napkin in 1974, some ridiculous date.
In
like
an airport, no doubt.
And Jasper liked it and wanted us to work on the interiors, which is, again, is amazing because that is not typical of Jasper either. He does everything himself. So we go see Philip, and Philip says, you know, Jasper professes to hate architecture, and the two of you never hang a painting on the wall. He said, it hardly makes any sense, does it? And so then we went down to look at the property, and I called Philip, and I said, you know, everything has changed. The house, the vista should be in another direction. The island is growing. The beautiful little house that everyone was talking about before now looks at a hill that has been bulldozed and 3 hideous houses on it. So we showed him our ideas for a small house. And of course, he's entirely too busy to deal with that kind of project, really. And he said, well, you should do this house. And I said, great, we will do this house. And
Jasper agreed as well.
Mm-hmm. I've known Jasper for a while also, so he agreed. And Jasper said, I don't care what you do as long as you don't do anything I don't like.
Well, what is he getting?
3 perfect shacks.
Well, can you describe them for us? What's the material? What are the interiors like?
There's stucco.
And how do you design a building in a sunny, warm climate that has lots of sunlight for someone, you know, the core of one's being relating to works of art that are fragile to light conditions, which obviously affects what you will have to design.
Well, basically, the only area there we have to worry will be his studio, where he will work. I'm sure he will not hang his work there. He's not known to do that.
What is the exterior?
Stucco,
White
it's
stucco.
plain stucco house with tile roofs, tile floors. It's a handmade Mexican dried in the sun tile.
What color?
It's a beautiful, beautiful dusty pink with an occasional chicken footprint or a dog footprint while it was drying. Being social fringe that we are, you meet a lot of very famous and important people, and many times you're very disappointed in just the character of the aura of this person. And Jasper is exceptional. The first time that I met him was his little house in Stony Point. Everyone was already out on the rear terraces. If I can use my arms, it's sloped like this, and the house sits here. And the back is covered with barn doors that all open. So when they're open, you're up in the treetops. And there is a deck out in these treetops. Jasper was cooking 5 different types of mushrooms that he had collected himself.
Together with John Cage.
5 different ways. He's talking to Merce Cunningham and Louise Nevelson about design, and he's giving John Cage a haircut and beard trim. And I thought, you know, the salon is still going, and I like what I see, and I'm glad I'm invited, and I hope I fit. I worked very hard at it.
May I thank you, Bob Bray and Mike Schaible, for your unusual candor and for your very thoughtful replies. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein for Interior Design, The New Freedom.